Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know, we always love hearing from you about what's on your mind.
Absolutely.
And you guys have sent in a ton of stuff lately on ADHD.
It's a topic that really seems to resonate right now.
Yeah, like it's in the news all the time or popping up in conversations.
And for good reason.
Right, like there's a lot, we're still learning about ADHD, and even more, we're realizing.
We're realizing that a lot of the common ideas about it might not be completely accurate.
Totally. And, we're all about getting to the bottom of things here.
Unpacking those assumptions.
So based on all the stuff you sent in, we thought it was the perfect time for a deep dive into ADHD.
A deep dive to clear up those misconceptions and really get a handle on what ADHD is really about.
Yeah, I think we all probably know someone who has it, or maybe even wonder about ourselves sometimes.
Definitely. And the more we know, the better equipped we are to understand and support each other.
Absolutely. And the coolest thing is that you guys have sent in some really amazing articles and research on this.
Really solid material to work with.
So we're going to use all of that as our guide today.
Our roadmap for this deep dive.
Our mission for this deep dive is to tackle some of the most common myths about ADHD head on.
Like busting those myths wide open.
Using the science and real stories to set the record straight.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. What's the first big myth we're tackling?
Okay, so this one, it always feels kind of fundamental when we're talking about ADHD.
Right, like it's at the core of so much misunderstanding.
Yeah, and that's the belief that ADHD isn't a real disorder, like it's made up or something.
Oh, I've definitely heard that one. It's almost like people think it's not a real medical condition, just an excuse.
Exactly. But the truth is, and this is where those articles and the research you guys sent in are so helpful.
They lay it all out.
ADHD is a legitimate, medically recognized neurodevelopmental disorder. And that's not just someone's opinion. It's the consensus of some seriously big medical players.
Like, who are we talking about?
Well, you've got the American Psychiatric Association, the APA.
The APA, yeah, they're a huge authority on mental health.
And then the World Health Organization, the WHO, the global health folks.
Global, wow, so this isn't just one country's perspective.
Oh, and even the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. They're all on board.
So it's pretty clear. It's not like this is a fringe idea.
Not at all. These are major medical organizations all recognizing ADHD as a real, legitimate condition.
And that recognition really matters because it underscores that ADHD is a genuine health concern, not just a made-up thing.
Right. It's not a matter of willpower or just trying harder. It's a real thing happening in the brain.
And speaking of history, it's fascinating how far back the recognition of ADHD goes.
I know, right? I was blown away when I saw that Dr. Russell Barkley, that ADHD expert.
Yeah, he's like the guru.
He actually found potential evidence of ADHD in medical writings from way back in 1775.
Wow, 1775. That's like ages ago.
I know. It's incredible to think that even back then, doctors were observing behaviors that we now recognize as ADHD.
So it's not a new phenomenon or a product of, our modern lives.
Not at all. And that really reinforces that this is something that's been around for centuries.
It's been part of the human experience for a long time.
And there's a biological basis for it, too. Like, we're not just talking about behavioral observations.
Right, there's real science behind it.
The research that you guys send in highlights how brain imaging studies consistently show that there are structural and functional differences in the brains of people with ADHD.
So you can actually see it? Like the brain is wired a bit differently?
Exactly. Those areas that are involved in things like attention, executive function, the stuff that we use to manage our thoughts and actions.
They actually look and work differently in people with ADHD.
So it's not just a matter of, oh, they just need to focus more. There are actual physical differences going on.
Real tangible evidence.
Yeah, and that's what makes those gene studies so interesting, too.
Oh, yeah. Like, are you talking about how genetics play a role?
Yeah. One of the experts, Dr. Michael Manos, he's a leading researcher in the field.
Yeah, I've heard of him. He's done some really important work.
He actually said that gene studies really back up the idea that ADHD has a strong genetic component.
So, like, it runs in families?
It can, just like some people might inherit a tendency towards certain physical traits.
Like height or eye color?
Exactly. Well, ADHD can have a similar pattern where that predisposition is passed down through families.
Fascinating. That kind of takes the blame off of individuals, right?
Yeah, because you can't just blame someone for having a certain genetic makeup.
It's not their fault. It's like blaming someone for being tall.
Makes total sense. And, when we talk about diagnosis, one thing that stood out to me in the material you guys sent.
Yeah, like how do they actually figure out if someone has ADHD?
Well, it's a lot like how many other mental health conditions are diagnosed. It involves a really careful clinical evaluation.
So a doctor will sit down with the person, ask them lots of questions.
Exactly. And they'll take a detailed history of their symptoms. You know,
Uh,
when did these things start happening? How often? How much do they impact your daily life?
really getting a full picture.
And it's important to note that, unlike some physical conditions,
Where there might be a blood test or something definitive.
there's no single test for ADHD. It's more about looking at the whole picture.
A pattern of symptoms.
But, that doesn't make the diagnosis any less real.
Not at all. It's just a different way of diagnosing, kind of like with the certain types of migraines or chronic pain conditions.
Right. Doctors look for specific patterns and consider all the different factors.
And that careful evaluation is so important because it helps ensure that people get the right support.
Absolutely. And, reading through the stories that people shared, it really struck me how powerful that moment of diagnosis can be.
Like a light bulb moment.
Yeah. There was one quote that just really got to me. This person said, "It was such a relief to hear that there was a name for what I was experiencing. I wasn't broken, I just had ADHD."
Oh, wow. That's so powerful. It's like that feeling of finally understanding what's been going on.
And that validation, like, I'm not just lazy or weird. There's a reason for why I struggle with these things.
And it's not their fault. It's a real condition.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to remember that ADHD is not just a made-up thing. It really does impact people's lives in profound ways.
Absolutely. Their struggles with attention, with memory, with being able to regulate themselves, those are all very real and very challenging.
Right, and dismissing it as not real just adds to the stigma and the feeling of being misunderstood.
So we've got to keep pushing back against that myth and promoting accurate information.
100%. Okay, so let's move on to another big one. This is something I think a lot of people still believe. ADHD only affects boys.
Yeah, I feel like this is one of those outdated stereotypes that just won't go away.
It is, but the research is clear, and you guys send in some great studies that confirm this. ADHD affects all genders.
So boys, girls, everyone's equally susceptible.
Yeah. The problem is that it's often underdiagnosed in girls and women, and there are some really important reasons for that.
I'm guessing it has to do with how symptoms present differently.
You got it. So boys, they're more likely to exhibit that classic hyperactive behavior, the fidgeting, the impulsivity, the kind of stuff that's more noticeable and can be disruptive.
Like in a classroom setting, it's hard to miss a kid who's bouncing off the walls.
Exactly. And that's often what leads to an earlier diagnosis for boys because those behaviors are harder to ignore.
Whereas girls might be more internal with their struggles, right?
That's it. The sources you sent talk about how girls are more likely to experience the inattentive symptoms of ADHD.
Like, what are some examples of those?
Well, think about daydreaming, having trouble getting organized, being easily distracted, or even being really sensitive emotionally.
Yeah, those things are definitely less disruptive than running around a classroom.
Exactly. And because those symptoms are often less obvious, it can be easy to miss them or misinterpret them.
Like thinking a girl is just being shy or a daydreamer.
Or, as the research pointed out, some girls with ADHD might get misdiagnosed with things like anxiety or depression because their symptoms overlap.
So they're not getting the right support because the underlying issue isn't being addressed.
It's a real problem. ADHD coach Shanna Pearson, who you guys know we've mentioned before,
Yeah, she's got some great insights.
she actually talks about how girls with ADHD often experience what she calls inwardly, mentally, and emotionally hyperactive.
Interesting. So like their minds are racing,
Yeah,
but it's not as outwardly visible.
that's a really great way to put it. On the outside, they might seem calm, but their minds are going a mile a minute, which makes it really hard to focus and stay on track.
So it's like a hidden struggle.
Absolutely. And that can have some serious consequences for girls.
Because if it's not recognized, it can lead to them feeling like they're just not good enough or that something's wrong with them.
Right. And it can impact their self-esteem, their schoolwork, their relationships.
And all because they're not getting the right support.
It's crucial to understand that ADHD doesn't discriminate based on gender.
It can affect anyone
And we need to be better at recognizing the different ways it shows up.
so that everyone who needs help can get it.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to another myth that pops up a lot, especially when people reminisce about their childhoods.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's this one about?
This one is about the idea that ADHD only affects children. Kids grow out of it.
Oh, I definitely remember hearing that growing up. Like it's a phase you go through.
It's a very common belief, but unfortunately it's not really accurate.
Not accurate. So it's not just a childhood thing.
Not necessarily. While it's true that for some people the hyperactive symptoms might become less intense as they get older.
Like they don't have that constant need to be moving or talking.
Exactly. But the research shows that a significant number of people continue to experience ADHD symptoms well into adulthood.
What kind of numbers are we talking about here?
The sources you guys sent in mentioned a range like anywhere from 50 to 80% of individuals with childhood ADHD will continue to have symptoms as adults.
That's a huge percentage,
Yes,
so it's
yeah.
definitely not something that just magically disappears.
Nope, it's not a phase you just grow out of. And what's interesting is that those symptoms can also kind of evolve as you get older.
Like how so?
Well, instead of that outward hyperactivity you might see in kids, adults with ADHD might experience more internal restlessness.
So it's less about fidgeting and more about feeling mentally restless.
Exactly. And they might still struggle with things like getting organized, managing their time, and staying focused on tasks.
So different challenges, but still stemming from that same underlying ADHD.
Absolutely. And the research really emphasized this. Like Dr. Manos actually said, ADHD never entirely disappears. It's a pretty strong statement.
It's a lifelong condition, and it just highlights the importance of getting the right support throughout life.
Right, because you're dealing with these challenges at school, in your relationships, at work.
And if you're not equipped to handle them, it can really impact your life.
Totally. One of the most powerful stories in the research was about a woman who wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until she was 28 years old.
28, that's pretty late.
Yeah. I know, right? And for years, she just thought she was lazy or bad at adulting.
Just struggling to keep up.
And then when she finally got that diagnosis, it was like everything clicked into place.
It all made sense.
She finally understood why she had always struggled with certain things.
That's so validating, but also kind of sad that she had to go so long without that understanding.
It is sad, and it just shows how these myths can really impact people's lives.
Because if they think it's just a childhood thing, they might not even seek a diagnosis.
Or they might dismiss their struggles as personal failings instead of seeing them as symptoms of a real condition.
And that can prevent them from getting the help they need.
Absolutely. So it's really important to spread awareness about adult ADHD and to let people know that it's okay to seek help no matter how old you are.
And that there is help available. It's not something you have to suffer through alone.
Okay, so this next myth ties in nicely with the last one we talked about. It's the belief that all people with ADHD are hyperactive.
Oh yeah, that's like the stereotypical image of ADHD, right?
Exactly. Like you think of a kid who can't sit still, who's always bouncing off the walls, interrupting people.
The classic fidgety kid.
And while that can definitely be a part of ADHD, it's not the whole story.
And there's more to it than that.
Way more. And this is where understanding the different types of ADHD is really important.
Oh, right. Like there are different ways it can present.
Yeah. So the research you guys sent in actually outlines three main types. There's predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive, impulsive, and then combined.
So you could have just the inattentive type or just the hyperactive type.
Exactly. And a lot of people, especially girls and adults, primarily experience that inattentive type.
So what does that look like?
Well, someone with the inattentive type of ADHD might not be outwardly hyperactive at all.
They might seem pretty calm on the outside.
Totally. They might not be fidgeting or interrupting, but they're still dealing with significant challenges.
Challenges with what?
With things like focusing, remembering information, and getting organized.
Also, it's more internal, right?
It is. It's like their minds are going in a million directions, but it's not always visible to others.
Therapist Teresa Thompson actually brought up a really important point about this.
Yeah, what did she say?
She was talking about how even children who appear calm and quiet can still be struggling immensely with attention and memory.
And those struggles are often invisible, right?
People just assume they're spacey or daydreaming, but it's actually much more complex than that.
It is. And even the hyperactivity itself can change as someone gets older. Like in adults with ADHD, it might manifest as a feeling of mental restlessness rather than physical hyperactivity.
So like their minds are constantly buzzing, but they're not necessarily running around.
Exactly. There was this one quote in the research that really captured this feeling. Someone said, "I look chill on the outside, but my brain is in 12 places at once."
That's a great way to describe it. It's like this constant mental whirlwind.
And that's why it's so dangerous to stick to that stereotypical image of ADHD as only being about hyperactivity.
Because we end up missing so many people who are struggling but don't fit that mold.
Especially girls and women who might be more likely to have the inattentive type.
And they might be slipping through the cracks because their symptoms aren't as obvious.
It's a real issue. We need to be more aware of the different ways ADHD can show up so that we can identify and support everyone who needs help.
Absolutely. And speaking of how ADHD shows up, let's talk about another myth that's become really prevalent in our digital age. ADHD is caused by social media, screen time, or technology.
Oh yeah, this one comes up all the time now. Like everyone's blaming screens for everything,
It's an easy connection to make, but it's important to look at what the science actually says.
which is that ADHD is primarily a genetic and neurological condition, not something that's caused by technology.
So the foundation of ADHD is in our brains, not in our phones.
Exactly. And Dr. Manos put it really clearly. He said, ADHD is a genetic disorder. It's not likely to emerge due to excessive screen time.
It's rooted in our biology, not in our apps.
But okay, let's be realistic. We all know that spending too much time on screens can be a problem.
And it could definitely impact our attention spans, right?
Totally. And the research acknowledges that excessive screen time can exacerbate existing ADHD symptoms or even make some behaviors look a bit like ADHD.
So it can worsen the situation, even if it didn't cause it.
That's a really important distinction. Because the way the ADHD brain is wired, it can be extra drawn to those quick hits of stimulation that you get from things like social media or video games.
Like, it's almost irresistible to check your phone every 5 seconds.
It's tough, and the research actually used a great analogy for this. They said that social media is like candy for ADHD brains. It's something they might crave, but it didn't cause the ADHD in the first place.
I like that analogy. It makes it much easier to understand.
It's about that attraction, not causation.
So it's not like social media created the ADHD, but it might be feeding into those existing tendencies.
Exactly. And we have to remember that ADHD has been around long before smartphones and the internet.
Like way before all.
So while managing screen time is definitely a good idea for everyone, especially those with ADHD,
It's about addressing something that might be making symptoms worse, not blaming it for the underlying condition.
right, it's all about understanding those nuances.
Now, there's another myth that I think is particularly damaging and honestly quite unfair to parents. ADHD is caused by bad parenting.
This one just feels so wrong on so many levels.
It's hurtful and is not supported by the evidence.
Absolutely not. And the sources you guys sent were really clear about this. ADHD is primarily genetic. It's a neurodevelopmental condition. It's not caused by the way someone was raised.
Like, you can't blame a parent for their child's genes.
It's like saying someone's parenting style caused them to inherit a certain eye color.
Doesn't make any sense.
Not at all. And Shanna Pearson, the ADHD coach, she was pretty blunt about this.
I bet she was.
She flat out said that ADHD is genetic and genes are the largest factor.
That's pretty definitive.
It is, and it's so important to emphasize that because blaming parents just adds a whole layer of guilt and shame to a situation that's already challenging.
It's like piling on when they're already trying their best.
Exactly. And, the research was really clear about this. It said that while supportive and structured parenting can be incredibly helpful in managing ADHD symptoms.
Like providing routines and clear expectations.
Right, that kind of stuff can make a huge difference. But those strategies don't cause or cure the underlying condition.
It's like any other health condition. Good parenting can help a child cope, but it doesn't make the condition go away.
That's a great analogy. And there was a quote from therapist Teresa Thompson that I thought was really powerful.
What did she say?
She said, "There is no strong evidence to support the idea that ADHD is caused by any certain form of parenting."
So there's no scientific basis for that blame?
Not at all. And the research actually goes on to say that decades of studies have found no link between parenting style and causing ADHD.
That's pretty conclusive. It's time to let go of that myth.
Parents of kids with ADHD deserve support and understanding, not blame. They're already dealing with a lot.
And let's be honest, parenting is hard enough without adding that extra burden.
Okay, so let's tackle another myth that comes up a lot, especially in conversations about mental health in general.
Okay, what are we talking about?
The idea that ADHD is overdiagnosed. Too many people are labeled ADHD nowadays.
Oh, I've heard that one. Like, people are just throwing that diagnosis around.
And on the surface, it can seem like that's true. Like, if you look at the numbers, diagnosis rates have been going up in recent years.
But maybe there's more to it than that.
There is. And Dr. Manos, who we mentioned earlier, he actually had a really insightful perspective on this.
I'm curious, yeah?
He basically said that a lot of this increase in diagnosis rates can be attributed to a few key things: greater awareness of ADHD, better screening tools, and improved access to healthcare.
So it's not that there are suddenly more people with ADHD, it's that we're getting better at identifying it.
Exactly. And we're also realizing that it's probably still underdiagnosed in certain groups, like girls, adults, and people from minority backgrounds.
Oh, right, because their symptoms might not fit that stereotypical image.
And because of things like stigma and limited access to resources, they might not be getting the diagnosis or support they need.
It's like we talked about earlier, girls with ADHD might not be as hyperactive, so they might not get noticed.
And there was this amazing story in the research about a woman who went undiagnosed for years because she was quiet and did well in school,
People just assumed she was fine.
but she was struggling internally. And it wasn't until she got that diagnosis that she finally understood what was going on.
But even though misdiagnosis can happen, you know, a kid who's just being impulsive might get mislabeled,
The research actually points out that the overall prevalence rates of ADHD haven't suddenly jumped way beyond what we've seen for decades.
which suggests that we're mostly identifying people who genuinely have it.
So it's not like everyone and their dog is suddenly being diagnosed with ADHD.
It's more about a shift in awareness and understanding.
And maybe some of that perception of overdiagnosis comes from the fact that we're just talking about it more openly now.
It's less taboo, so more people are comfortable seeking help.
And it's important to remember that ADHD involves a certain level of frequency and impairment of those core symptoms that goes way beyond just being occasionally distracted.
It's about how much those symptoms are impacting your life.
It's about a persistent pattern that interferes with your ability to function in different areas.
It's not just a matter of having a senior moment every now and then.
We've all been there, but that's not the same as living with ADHD.
And you know, this actually leads us to another myth that I think is particularly hurtful to people with ADHD.
Yeah, this one is definitely one of the worst ones.
And that's the belief that people with ADHD are just lazy or not motivated.
Ugh, I hate that one. It's so dismissive and completely misses the point.
It's like they're being judged for something that's beyond their control.
It is. And Dr. Russell Barkley, you know, that ADHD expert,
Yeah, he's a big name in the field.
he actually explained this so well. He said, and I'm going to quote him directly, ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do. It's a disorder of doing what you know.
Wow, that's so powerful and so accurate.
It really is. Because people with ADHD often have the desire to succeed. They want to get things done, but they struggle with those executive functions that are necessary to make it happen.
It's like they have the motivation but lack the tools.
And those executive functions, those are like the brain's management system, right? They're what we use to plan, organize, manage our time, stay focused, control our impulses.
And for someone with ADHD, those functions might not be working as smoothly.
Exactly. So it's not about laziness, it's about a difference in brain wiring that make those everyday tasks much harder.
And there's a quote in the research that I think really gets to the heart of this. Someone said, nobody wants to just do it more than someone with ADHD who feels stuck.
I love that quote. It's so relatable for anyone who struggles with those feelings of wanting to do something but not being able to quite get started.
Like your brain is holding you back, even though you want to move forward.
And that's why labeling someone with ADHD as lazy is so damaging.
It just adds insult to injury.
Because it ignores those very real struggles they're facing with organization, time management, memory,
And it makes them feel like it's their fault.
and that they should just be able to snap out of it, which is simply not the case.
What people with ADHD need is understanding, support, and tools to help them work with their brains, not judgment and shame.
Absolutely. Okay, ready for another one?
Hit me with it.
Okay, so this myth is one that I think a lot of people can relate to on a superficial level, which might be why it's so persistent.
Okay, I'm curious. What's this myth about?
This one is about the idea that everyone has a little ADHD.
Oh, yeah, I hear this one all the time. Like, oh, I'm so ADHD today, I can't focus.
It's become almost a casual way to describe being distracted or forgetful.
Is it really accurate?
Well, the research we looked at actually makes a really important distinction here.
I'm all ears.
It's not that simple. Like, yes, we all have moments where we get distracted, we forget things, we struggle to focus.
We're human. It happens.
But that's not the same as having ADHD, and the research really emphasizes this.
So what's the difference?
Well, for someone with ADHD, those symptoms are chronic, they're pervasive, and they significantly impair their ability to function in daily life.
So it's not just about those occasional moments. It's a constant struggle.
Exactly. And the analogy that they used in one of the articles was so helpful. They said, saying everyone has ADHD is like saying everyone has a migraine because they've had a headache before.
Oh, that's a good one. It really puts things in perspective.
It does, because everyone has headaches sometimes, but that doesn't mean everyone has a debilitating migraine disorder.
And in the same way, everyone might get distracted sometimes, but that doesn't mean they have ADHD.
Because ADHD is a diagnosable condition with a neurological basis, it's not just a personality quirk.
And it's important to acknowledge that difference.
It is, because when we say everyone has a little ADHD, we're actually minimizing the real challenges and the functional impairments that people with ADHD face every day.
It can make them feel invalidated, like their struggles aren't being taken seriously.
And that's why it's so important to be mindful of the language we use and to remember that there's a big difference between occasional distractibility and a clinical diagnosis of ADHD.
It's about respecting the lived experience of people who are actually dealing with this condition.
Okay, so for our last myth, let's talk about treatment. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what works for ADHD.
Yeah, people had a lot of opinions on this.
They do, and one of the most common myths is that medication is the only treatment for ADHD.
Like it's the magic bullet.
And while medication can be a really effective part of treatment for many people with ADHD,
It can make a big difference in managing symptoms.
it's definitely not the only answer, and it's often not a standalone solution.
So what else is there?
Well, the research really emphasizes that the most effective way to treat ADHD is often a multifaceted approach that combines medication with a whole range of other strategies and supports.
Like a toolbox of different options.
I like that, a toolbox. And what goes in that toolbox can vary depending on the individual, their specific needs, and their age.
So it's personalized treatment.
That's the key. And the research talks about things like behavioral therapies, skills training, different types of therapy, and even making changes to someone's environment to better support their needs.
So it's not just about changing the brain chemistry. It's about giving people tools and strategies.
Exactly. And for adults with ADHD, while medication might help with focus and attention, it's not going to magically teach them how to organize their time or manage their emotions.
So they need those additional strategies.
They do, and that's where things like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT can be really helpful.
CBT, yeah, I've heard of that. What does it involve?
Well, for ADHD, CBT is specifically adapted to teach practical skills for things like organization, time management, and managing impulsivity.
So it's like training your brain to work differently.
In a way, yes. It's about learning new habits and patterns of thinking that can help you work with your ADHD, not against it.
And there's also something called ADHD coaching, right?
That's right. And ADHD coaches provide personalized support and accountability for people with ADHD.
So they help them set goals, develop strategies, stay on track.
And a lot of people find that support groups can be incredibly helpful too, just connecting with others who understand what it's like to live with ADHD.
It's that sense of community, not feeling so alone.
Totally. And then you've got things like mindfulness practices, which can help with managing stress and anxiety.
Yeah, like learning to be present in the moment and calm those racing thoughts.
And even lifestyle factors can play a role. The research talks about how getting regular exercise, enough sleep, and eating a healthy diet can all have a positive impact on ADHD symptoms.
So it's a holistic approach, looking at the whole person.
It is, and that's really the key takeaway here. There's no one-size-fits-all solution for ADHD.
It's about finding what works best for each individual.
And often that involves a combination of different approaches that work together to address the various challenges of living with ADHD.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about ADHD, not just the facts, but also the human impact.
Me too. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that ADHD is complex, it's often misunderstood, and these myths can have a really negative impact on people's lives.
They can prevent people from getting the help they need and from understanding themselves.
Absolutely. We have to keep pushing back against these myths and promoting accurate information about ADHD.
So that people can feel empowered to seek support and to live fulfilling lives.
So as you're listening to this and thinking about all the things we've talked about, take some time to reflect on how these insights might change the way you view ADHD, whether in yourself or in others.
It's about challenging our assumptions and opening ourselves up to new perspectives.
And maybe even more importantly, what new questions does this spark for you? ADHD is a topic that's constantly evolving, and the more we learn and talk about it, the better equipped we'll be to support each other.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing conversation, and we all have a role to play in shaping it.
Thanks for joining us.